Duvalier in Haiti and General Figueiredo in Brazil, General Strasser in Paraguay, General Pinochet in Chile, all of whom were on the way out within a year and a half of the Pope's appearing and galvanizing an opposition.
He would often say to the young people, I haven't come just to speak to you, I've come to listen to you and to hear your questions. And in fact, he united the young people of the world.
He courageously faced the international community in saying that we must protect the sanctity, dignity of all people from conception to natural death.
John Paul II saw the Western Hemisphere as the subject of a single great act of evangelization. And he wanted us to think together about the new evangelization in the 21st century.
John Paul II brought a great renewal of confidence, excitement, and joy to Christian life. We see this in World Youth Day in Denver, in Toronto. We also see a renewed call for human dignity, the gospel of life, the respect for indigenous people, a commitment with the poor throughout Latin America and North America.
La elección de Juan Pablo II en octubre del 1978 sorprendió al mundo. Era el primer no italiano electo al papado en más de 400 años. Este fue el primer indicio de que su papado sería diferente.
I cardinali hanno chiamato un nuovo vescovo di Roma. Lo hanno chiamato di un paese lontano.
From the first moments, he captivated the world. He didn't follow procedure, much like Pope Francis didn't follow procedure. He bonded himself. He electrified the world by his presence. It was a youthful presence, a booming voice. And he started to do things right away which were not in the schema, they were not in the recipe book, they were not in the playbook. He was not afraid to reach out.
Non abbiate paura. Aprite, anzi spalancate le porte a Cristo, alla sua salvatrice potestà. Aprite i confini degli stati, i sistemi economici come quelli politici, i vasti campi di cultura, di civiltà, di sviluppo. Non abbiate paura.
On the day that he said to the world, "Be not afraid," open wide the doors to Christ, the message was clearly that Christianity has an important place in the moral consciousness of every nation. And in a tremendous way, he restored the moral voice of the Pope in our time.
Cuando Juan Pablo asumió el papado, se enfrentó a un mundo lleno de conflictos. Muy pronto, el nuevo Papa mostró a ese mundo que no solo sería un líder espiritual, sino también estadista mundial y constructor de la paz. 2 meses después de la elección del Papa, Argentina y Chile estuvieron al borde de la guerra por una controversia fronteriza. Juan Pablo sirvió como mediador.
Una guerra entre Argentina y Chile hubiera acabado con cualquier proceso o intento siquiera de democratización. Entonces piden la intervención del Vaticano. Aquí lo importante es que forma parte de una diplomacia de la Santa Sede para mediar en todos los conflictos latinoamericanos para abrir cauces a la democracia. porque si no hay democracia, no hay justicia social. Pero esa es la dimensión de Juan Pablo II. Esa es su estatura de estadista, de papa, de pastor y de procesos democratizadores en América Latina. Dentro de este gran contexto, debemos entender lo que sucedió mediando una guerra que parecía inevitable entre Argentina y Chile.
Pero la paz negociada representaría una breve tregua en un periodo de revueltas civiles y agitaciones violentas en toda Latinoamérica.
América Latina empieza a tener situaciones muy complicadas de regímenes militares totalitaristas que no creen en la dignidad de la persona humana y al mismo tiempo combatían contra, digamos, la infiltración marxista, regímenes marxistas que empezaron a surgir en el continente, que como tú bien sabes tampoco tenían un gran respeto por la dignidad humana. En ambos casos la Iglesia se encuentra metida en el medio.
Pope John Paul put America in the center of the Catholic map. His first trip was not to Poland, was not to a European country. The first trip of his pontificate was to a Latin American country, was to Mexico.
The Holy Father had a very acute awareness of America as the New World and as being a very Christian hemisphere. His very first trip as Holy Father was to the Puebla Conference in Mexico, and he came landing in Santo Domingo because he said he wanted to enter the Americas the way that the gospel did when Christopher Columbus arrived to that part of the world.
Antes de realizar su primer viaje misionero, que fue paradigma para todos sus otros viajes, el Papa desde Roma le dice a Nuestra Señora de Guadalupe, le pide que le abra el corazón de sus hombres. Y vaya si se los abrió.
1 millón de mexicanos bordean la carretera por la que el Papa viaja a la ciudad de Puebla para decir un discurso en la reunión del episcopado latinoamericano. Ahí sus palabras resonarían en todo el continente. Juan Pablo abordó con decisión la cuestión de la teología de la liberación, una preocupación creciente en la Iglesia. En su definición más extrema, la teología de la liberación servía para justificar los movimientos guerrilleros. Al hablar ante los obispos latinoamericanos, Juan Pablo rechazó la idea de Cristo concebido como un revolucionario marxista. Por el contrario, exhortó a la Iglesia a proclamar el Evangelio con valentía, una verdad capaz de conducir a la transformación de la sociedad.
Juan Pablo II le imprime una enorme claridad a las líneas pastorales de la Iglesia latinoamericana. Esto es lo que yo creo que va a determinar el enorme éxito de la recepción del Concilio Vaticano II en América Latina. Él va a decir, todo el Evangelio contiene de suyo una teología de la liberación, pero la liberación cristiana va mucho más allá de cualquier programa sociopolítico. Reducir la fe a un programa estrictamente político revolucionario es traicionar la fe, no por la falta de justicia, sino porque el programa de la fe es muchísimo más amplio.
En octubre de 1979, Juan Pablo realizó su primer viaje papal a los Estados Unidos. El enfoque de su visita sería la defensa de la dignidad de todo ser humano.
Each one of you represents a particular state, system, and political structure, but what you represent above all are individual human beings. For this activity comes from man, is exercised by men, and is for men.
That 1979 speech at the United Nations marked the moment, I believe, when the Catholic Church became the foremost institutional voice on the world stage for the defense of human rights and human dignity.
He saw that what we were going to make of the 20th and 21st century was tied above all to what we made of the person and protecting that in all of its integrity.
John Paul II's experience of the Second World War taught him that modernity has built into it something that he would later call the culture of death. As Pope, he applied his critique of that culture of death across the board, but with particular focus on the threats to the dignity of the human person.
I do not hesitate to proclaim before you and before the world that all human life, from the moment of conception and through all subsequent stages, is sacred. Human life is created in the image and likeness of God. This explains our efforts to defend human life against every influence or action that threatens or weakens it, as well as our endeavors to make every life more human in all its aspects.
As someone who was standing on the Mall in Washington in 1979, you could feel the impact that John Paul II had. This energized the pro-life movement in America, not only among Catholics, but among a broad base of Americans. And his consistent articulation of the gospel of life, which began in this homily in Washington, has had a tremendous impact for nearly half a century.
Culture was a key concept for John Paul II. We must never forget that he was a philosopher as well as a priest. For him, culture is what holds up law and holds up governments. And he said 100 times in 100 different ways, if human life and human dignity aren't protected first in the culture, then they can't be protected in law.
Era un talentoso teólogo, filósofo y lingüista, y un gigante a nivel internacional. El mayor don del juvenil Juan Pablo II fue su habilidad para comunicarse con todos los que encontraba.
When you wonder about the mystery of yourself, look to Christ. And when you wonder about role in the future of the world, look to Christ. People have placed a lot of hope in you. The church needs you. The world needs you.
I got his blessing, thank God. It's a moment I'll never forget.
And what he does to us is we change our love, he changes our feelings. And I guess that's the way I feel. Hope is all right.
Yeah, he's okay.
You seem to be almost ready to cry.
Yeah.
I never saw a person who was able to connect with people as well as he could. And I asked him about it. I said, you have an extraordinary ability to communicate. He says that is very, very important because Christ had a great ability to communicate as well. And that's what we do.
John Paul II, he loves you. He loves you.
It is all my message. Finished.
Papa, como lo hiciera Pablo VI en Medellín, y él siguiendo eso besa la tierra de Nicaragua libre.
The church in Nicaragua is polarized, and the Sandinistas are trying to construct an alternative to the institutionalized church by generating radical politics within the Catholic communities.
All the liberation theologians concentrated in Nicaragua because they thought Nicaragua was going to be our Eden, our heaven on earth. And some of those priests, actually 4 of them, accepted political positions under the Sandinista government.
When he arrived, he knew that he will have 4 priest ministers in the Sandinista regime. And he had to greet them, but he only recognized Father Cardinal, who was a very iconic figure.
Father Ernesto Cardenal wanted to kneel in front of Pope John Paul, and Pope John Paul giving some kind of nice approach or gesture to him.
Mostrando que no permitiría ser manipulado por un régimen marxista, Juan Pablo amonestó públicamente al sacerdote, insistiendo que restaurara su posición en la iglesia.
Several years later, Ernesto Cardenal would admit that he tried, he gave it a shot at manipulating the Pope, and he failed.
La Iglesia debe mantenerse unida para poder contrarrestar deformaciones debidas a cualquier ideología humana o programa político.
The Sandinista government in Nicaragua tried to make a mess out of the Pope's visit, particularly his Mass in Managua, the capital of the country, by chanting political slogans and whatnot. He basically shut them up by calling for silence.
Silencio.
Happily, Father Tucci had arranged for that Mass to be broadcast all over Central America. And people were appalled at this viciousness towards the Pope.
La primera que quiere la paz es la Iglesia.
And it's from that point, I think, that Marxist current in Central America begins to recede. People said, if dissing the Pope is at the center of this project, we don't want any part of it.
En El Salvador, Juan Pablo se enfrentó a una nación desgarrada. La iglesia en El Salvador seguía desconcertada por el asesinato en 1980 del arzobispo Oscar Romero, un destacado defensor de los pobres que públicamente denunció los abusos a los derechos humanos. A pesar de preocupaciones sobre los vínculos de Romero con la teología de la liberación, Juan Pablo dejó claro que su martirio no sería olvidado.
¿Cuántas vidas nobles, inocentes, tronchadas cruel y brutalmente? También de sacerdotes, religiosos, religiosas, e incluso Monseñor Oscar Arnulfo Romero. Pido que ningún interés ideológico pretenda instrumentalizar su sacrificio.
viene a traer un mensaje de paz, de reconciliación, porque ya sabemos que los países centroamericanos han estado en constante conflicto. Entonces la llegada del Santo Padre debe de hacernos motivar.
En Perú, Juan Pablo encontró un país en confusión. Sendero Luminoso, un grupo guerrillero conocido por su brutalidad, lo había sumergido en una sangrienta guerra civil.
Llegó en tiempos difíciles, eran los tiempos de la violencia terrorista, y el gran mensaje que nos trajo el Santo Padre fue un mensaje de reconciliación, un mensaje muy valiente que el Papa Juan Pablo II lanzó a los terroristas en ese momento para que depusieran la violencia y se convirtieran al Evangelio.
Para Juan Pablo, la búsqueda de la paz iba de la mano de la justicia social.
Pope John Paul II, on the third day of his visit to Brazil, spent the day with poor people. He told them that the Roman Catholic Church wants to be the church of the poor.
As the Pope faced the people of Vidicao, he appeared very moved. Others could not hold back the tears. Pope John Paul challenged the military government to establish social equality. Then, John Paul gave his gold papal ring to the parish.
Vocês, Abelardos, está muito perto do coração do Papa, porque está muito perto do coração de Cristo. Os pobres são os prediletos de Deus, e a eles Jesus dedicou amor de preferência que a Igreja deseja imitar.
En 1987, Juan Pablo volvió a Norteamérica. En una teleconferencia con jóvenes, el Papa escuchó a Tony Meléndez, un talentoso músico que nació sin brazos.
Today is like no other day before. You and I will never be.
I'm in the audience on a small platform, and he comes over and kisses me. And next thing I hear is Tony. And, you know, in that Polish voice of his, Tony, Tony, Tony. I hear my name, and my eyes get big again, and my heart starts racing again. But he was to share a few words with me.
Tony, Tony, you are giving hope to all of us. My wish to you is to continue of giving this hope to all the people.
A pope kisses you, 6,000 people on their feet, and life-changing experience. I almost don't even have words because God's presence was so alive that day.
Tony.
You know, if someone was to ask me, Tony, what would you want to be called? Disabled, handicapped, what? And I always say, human, human. So the dignity of life is precious, beautiful, and because of this moment with John Paul II, now Saint John Paul, it's made me stronger as a man.
Como líder en búsqueda de justicia y equidad, no olvidó a ningún grupo. Esto fue especialmente cierto de los pueblos indígenas.
En todos los viajes por América Latina, principalmente Guatemala, México, Centroamérica, en lugares de una alta densidad de población indígena, siempre estuvo con ellos, estuvo junto a ellos. La raíz indígena adquiere un papel preponderante dentro de la cristiandad de América, por decirle de alguna manera. Y esto, al darles visibilidad, orienta líneas pastorales muy importantes en beneficio a los indígenas. Y entonces, con esta visibilidad, con esta línea teológica y pastoral que le impone Juan Pablo II, gana mucha claridad cuál es el objetivo de una pastoral indígena en la reivindicación de sus culturas, en la reivindicación de sus personas.
When he went to Ontario
And he allowed himself to be blessed and smudged in a sacred way by our elders. That was significant. Of course, it was also in his messages, he said that Jesus himself is Indian. Now, no other spiritual leader had ever said that before. And the Holy Father came here and recognized the self-determination of our people.
Sé de no pocos hermanos y hermanas indígenas que han sido desplazados de sus lugares de origen. Existen igualmente muchas comunidades indígenas que sufren un alto índice de pobreza. Quiero aseguraros que la Iglesia os acompaña y apoya en vuestras legítimas aspiraciones y justas reivindicaciones.
En un mundo que rápidamente se transformaba ante los efectos de la globalización, Juan Pablo se mantuvo sin vacilar del lado del obrero.
John Paul II was the first pope who had, in a sense, worked for a living. Karol Wojtyła spent 4.5 very difficult years as a manual laborer in Nazi-occupied Poland. And being the reflective person that he was, he drew out of that a very profound sense for the difficulties, the hardness of manual labor, but how even that can be transformed into an expression of human dignity.
Por haber escrito las encíclicas, Padre Santo, del amor y excesis, solicitudes sociales, que es digno para nosotros una esperanza de fe. Los mineros queremos que se ponga este casco y sea un trabajador minero más de Catapi.
It seems to me the heart of John Paul II is to recognize, first, the church isn't going to propose a third economic system, but the church is going to propose a new understanding of the human being, which leads to transformation in virtue, a transformation in community. That means proposing a third, but not as an economic system, but as a whole way of life.
El Papa decía que lo más cercano a la política era la caridad, era el amor, porque es una vocación de servicio. Que al contrario, lo más lejano a la política es aquello con lo cual tendemos a identificarla, el poder. Dice, más cercana está la virtud de la caridad a la política que el poder. Y esto es, cuando se entiende así, la política se convierte en algo noble que sirve a la democracia y realmente a generar un ámbito de auténtica libertad y defensa de la dignidad de la persona humana.
By putting the defense and promotion of human rights at the center of what any just government would be about, John Paul II sent very powerful signals that the church was going to stand with the forces of freedom and democracy. It was going to support revolutions of conscience in which people claimed the truth of their human dignity and put that at the center of their political activity.
Last night, under a constant rain, 150,000 people heard the Pope deliver a strong denouncement on the Brazilian government's treatment of the worker. The Pope defended the right of workers to jobs, fair wages, and the right to organize.
La apasionada defensa de los obreros de Brasil por Juan Pablo se convirtió en un acto de empoderamiento, ayudando a inspirar un movimiento pro-democrático que llevaría a la primera elección. Al acercarse a su visita en Haití en 1983, Juan Pablo conoció muy bien los abusos del presidente Duvalier, conocido por el mundo como Baby Doc. Gobernó el país más pobre del hemisferio a través de un grupo paramilitar.
The visit of John Paul II to Haiti was very dramatic. People were fed up with the dictatorship. The masses of people came to welcome the Holy Father, and it was an expression of hope, of desire to see a change of regime in Haiti.
John Paul II showed up and made a speech in Creole. He said, "Faut que ça change. Things need to change here." So this visit that was supposed to buttress the regime of Baby Doc ended up publicizing all the problems of the regime to a local and international audience and giving international backing to all the people who were criticizing Baby Doc locally.
Baby Doc fue derrocado en 1986.
It is official now. The president of Haiti, Jean-Claude Duvalier, has fled his country. Duvalier's exile brings to an end a 30-year dynasty.
John Paul II marks the generation of a Catholic politics of democratization for the first time. Popes before him talked about democracy. He's the one, for the first time, who actually generated a Catholic involvement concretely in the process of democratization, who made it possible for the third wave of democratization around the world to be overwhelmingly a Catholic wave.
En Chile, el general Pinochet gobernó con mano de hierro desde su golpe militar en 1973. Su reinado se caracterizó por los abusos a los derechos humanos y la represión de las libertades civiles.
The Holy Father arrived in Chile. He was well informed, brief. He was very polite in the presidential palace, but then he went and celebrated in the National Stadium. And there, at the celebration, the Holy Father publicly condemned the violations of human rights.
When he was dealing with dictators, I think he tried to get these men to understand that they were going to be judged by history. The pastor was always at work in these conversations between John Paul II and political figures.
John Paul II's role during the Pinochet dictatorship is paradigmatic of his role in Latin America more generally. He helps to thread a needle, in a certain sense, between the polarized politics of the radical left and the repressive and authoritarian and criminal right. He's not afraid to inspire the church to speak out in an uncompromising way to condemn torture, disappearance, systematic oppression, the use of violence. At the same time, though, he helped to facilitate a transition away from the Pinochet dictatorship that affirmed democracy as the proper response.
La caída de Pinochet pronto le siguió la caída del general Alfredo Stroessner, que fue el dictador militar de Paraguay durante mucho tiempo. El general Stroessner recibió a Juan Pablo II en su país solo para ver que su reino de terror se desmoronaba como resultado de la misma.
Las cosas con los viajes del Papa habían cambiado mucho en América Latina. Una persona o alguien de la jerarquía católica que antes hablase de derechos humanos o de dignidad de la persona, en algunos países era tachado casi de subversivo. El Papa pudo hablar de todo esto en profundidad y cambió completamente las reglas del juego.
Y Espíritu Santo.
Para Juan Pablo II, la libertad religiosa no es un discurso, no es una idea bonita, no es solamente un civil right, es un asunto de vida o muerte.
Para los católicos mexicanos, la batalla por la libertad religiosa fue una lucha constante pagada con la sangre de innumerables mártires.
A lo largo del siglo XX, desde 1914 en adelante, México vive una situación de persecución religiosa. De 1914 a 1938 es una persecución abierta, violenta, muy violenta en algunos momentos, como la cristiada. Después de eso se da una larga persecución de baja intensidad. En el ámbito público se arriesgaba una carrera política, se arriesgaba una carrera profesional por mostrar una identidad católica.
La presencia de Juan Pablo en México no solo animó a los creyentes, también estimuló al gobierno a replantearse su relación con la Iglesia.
El Papa Juan Pablo II se convirtió realmente en el primer líder global de la historia. Eso despierta la conciencia en la clase política mexicana de que ya no es posible ignorar a la Iglesia Católica. La Iglesia Católica no solo no está dispuesta a quedarse en las sacristías, sino que va a salir a la calle y empieza una serie de negociaciones con el Estado mexicano. Esto culmina en la reforma constitucional de 1992, que le da reconocimiento civil, le da certeza jurídica a las iglesias. Juan Pablo II es, sin lugar a dudas, el profeta de la libertad religiosa en el mundo contemporáneo, y lo será para siempre.
Sus enemigos dijeron que vino a Latinoamérica a aplacar las esperanzas de las masas. En realidad, inició una revolución. Y fue en el continente americano donde Juan Pablo iniciaría un nuevo tipo de revolución al realizar la Jornada Mundial de la Juventud en Buenos Aires en el 1987. El espectáculo de millones de jóvenes reunidos con el Papa se convertiría en un símbolo de la juventud y vitalidad de la Iglesia. Pero en 1993, mientras se preparaba la Jornada Mundial de la Juventud en Denver, escépticos dudaban que el evento tuviera eco en Estados Unidos.
John Paul II went to Denver very deliberately in order to take World Youth Day to what he perceived to be a deeply secularized environment and see what would happen.
And they said with World Youth Day, as a matter of fact, you could expect no more than 20,000 young people. That was what the projections were from some of the officials that we were talking to. We had a surprise waiting for us. It was unforgettable. I mean, against this background that I've just described, we're suddenly transported into Mile High Stadium during a thunderstorm with 100,000 young people. And when the Holy Father arrived and experienced the magnificent response to his presence as the successor of Peter, he wept very quietly, but he wept.
All of a sudden, out of the middle of nowhere, this helicopter just comes down. And I go, oh my God, pass me my camera. John Paul II, we love you. I mean, he had the crowd going, the crowd was laughing, and the crowd was cheering. And this was all kids who were my age. It makes me love being Catholic.
I mean, it was transforming for him, it was transforming for the bishops, it was transforming for the young people.
And then towards the end of his talk, it stopped raining and this rainbow appeared across the stage. It felt like a sign from God, that we are here and that what we're doing is wonderful.
Before Denver, we had no seminaries. After Denver, 93, we now have 2 seminaries with a combined number of seminarians of 130. That would never have happened without the celebration of World Youth Day.
I think it was his presence that just had such a great impact on me. What stands out most in my mind was when he was in the Popemobile and he was approaching, coming by, and when John Paul II looked at you and looked into your eyes, he was transmitting his love for you and the love of Christ. I just knew that I wanted to live for Christ. So I'd say it was the seed that was planted in World Youth Day in Denver in '93 that came to full blossom.
I have always known that for the church and for the civil society, Young people constitute the hope of the future.
He perceived the future of the church as being rooted in the East, in Poland, in East Europe, the church that had suffered. But after Denver, he said, it would be a revolution not only from the East, but from the young people of the West, as he saw the fervor that they had for Jesus and for the church.
In '93 in Denver, when he challenged the young and challenged us all, and he said, "Woe to you if you do not defend life." Many of our sisters can trace their vocations to their encounter with Pope John Paul II in Denver. It's incredible, his impact.
The liberating message of the gospel of life has been put into your hands. And the mission of proclaiming it to the ends of the earth is now passing to your generation.
En 1995, Juan Pablo volvió a los Estados Unidos. En Nueva York se dirigió a la Asamblea General de las Naciones Unidas con motivo de su 50 aniversario. Centró su atención en la importancia de los derechos humanos, basados en los principios morales absolutos.
What's really clear in John Paul II's call for a new anthropology of human rights is if you're going to affirm human rights as the defense of the human person, you can't afford to take some and not others. And so even though within the human rights movement it's unpopular to say that abortion really is a fundamental violation of human rights, he's uncompromising about saying we have to have the seriousness and the integrity to defend all human rights in an indivisible way.
Da respuesta al miedo que ofusca la existencia humana al final del siglo es el esfuerzo común por construir la civilización del amor, fundada en los valores universales de la paz, de la solidaridad, de la justicia y de la libertad.
One of John Paul II's greatest contributions is his vision of the human person as a being created out of love and created for life. That was the informing principle of John Paul II's pastoral mission as Pope. And therefore, John Paul II called us to come together in solidarity to build a civilization of love.
Aunque había envejecido, Juan Pablo aún mantenía su fuerza moral y su admirable voluntad. Nunca se observó mejor que en su histórico viaje a Cuba en 1998.
Recuerdo el primer viaje de Juan Pablo II a Polonia en el 79. El lenguaje en Cuba era idéntico, adaptado a la situación local, pero era idéntico. Yo creo que fue un mensaje de esperanza, un mensaje de derechos humanos, un mensaje de dignidad de la persona. Fue una reacción muy positiva.
La Iglesia, al llevar a cabo su misión, propone al mundo una justicia nueva, la justicia del reino de Dios. Aunque los tiempos y las circunstancias cambien, siempre hay quienes necesitan de la voz de la Iglesia.
El mensaje de Juan Pablo II incluía elementos como aspirar a mayor libertad religiosa, elementos como el plantear que el Estado cubano no tenía nada que temer de la Iglesia, una Iglesia servidora.
y libres con esa libertad a la cual Cristo nos ha liberado.
Aunque Castro se mantuvo en el poder después de la visita de Juan Pablo, Cuba nunca sería la misma.
Se consiguieron muchas cosas. Por ejemplo, una mayor presencia social de la Iglesia. Se consiguieron facilitaciones para la educación del clero católico en la isla. Se restituyó en el calendario cubano una fiesta que desde los años 60 había sido borrada, que era la fiesta de Navidad.
La gente se acercó a las iglesias de diversa manera, con mayor naturalidad, sin temor o con mucho menos temor, confiando que no solamente no tendrían ecos negativos esa presencia, sino que, digamos, respirarían con los pulmones más abiertos, más plenos, una nueva era de relaciones.
Juan Pablo atravesó el Atlántico para otra Jornada Mundial de la Juventud en 2002. Fue su tercer viaje a Canadá. En 1984 se había convertido en el primer papa en visitar tierra canadiense. Esta vez vino a Toronto, una secular metrópolis necesitada de un auténtico testimonio de vida espiritual.
When the World Youth Day is given to a particular country, it's given to that country as a gift to wake the country up. And certainly in secular Toronto, the World Youth Day had a huge effect. When we speak of World Youth Day, we speak of the joy that invaded this city. On those days that the World Youth Day was here and that he walked among us, Pope John Paul II, it united people together of all faiths, of all ethnic backgrounds, and it brought forth goodness.
Although I have lived through much darkness and the harsh totalitarian regimes, I have seen enough evidence to be unshakably convinced that no difficulty, no fear is so great that it can completely suffocate the hope that springs eternal in the hearts of the young.
He, out of like all the world leaders, really believe in the youth. He believes in us. He's just so beautiful in his own life, and you can tell that his own youth is so there on the surface with him too.
What I found fascinating with this interest in young people, especially in Pope John Paul II in the final years, he was not a rock star, he was not in good physical shape, he was not an athlete. John Paul II was a witness. And it didn't matter the age, the infirmity, the illness, the immobility, the slurred speech, all of the things that we witnessed, particularly in Toronto, were not a deterrent, but rather an attraction. And I think part of it is they saw extraordinary humanity and extraordinary holiness. And extraordinary humanity and holiness do not depend on the same qualities that the world does for its form of success.
Las Jornadas Mundiales de la Juventud fueron solo un ejemplo de la unidad que soñó Juan Pablo. Su visión de una América unida bajo la guía de Nuestra Señora de Guadalupe adquirió una forma real en el documento Ecclesia in America.
Ecclesia in America marks a decisive turning point in the history of the Church, especially in North America. Prior to this, most American Catholics looked to Europe. After Ecclesia in America, it is clear the Church in the United States, Catholics must also look south. And it was prophetic as well, because since that time, the great growth of the Catholic Church in the United States, for example, has been among Hispanics. And so the future, in so many ways, of Catholicism is interlinked in a way we did not perceive before John Paul II and Ecclesia in America.
The Holy Father's vision underscored the need for a greater sense of cooperation and closeness and communication between the churches of North and South America. Certainly, the massive migration from Latin America to the north has tied the continents together even more closely. Now, over half the Catholics under 30 years of age are Hispanic, and so this is a very important demographic for the future of the Catholic Church in the United States.
Sociedades desarrolladas, sociedades con más posibilidades económicas tienen mucho que aportar a la tarea de la evangelización, pero también las sociedades, las comunidades más pobres tienen que aportar a las primeras el don de su fe, de su esperanza, el don de los valores de la vida cristiana.
Vivimos una diversidad muy grande en América, y sobre todo entre América Latina, Estados Unidos y Canadá. Una diversidad muy grande, de todo punto de vista. Pero lo que es fundamental es que esa diversidad se encamine y se conjugue hacia la unidad.
Para Juan Pablo, la fuente de esta unidad puede encontrarse en Nuestra Señora de Guadalupe, cuya milagrosa aparición a San Juan Diego resultó en la mayor conversión de almas en la historia.
She is the beautiful mestiza woman. She is neither European nor is she indigenous. She is both. She is all of us, and all of us can claim her. There's nothing like the Guadalupe apparition, because when she came here, she came simply as a mother. Her message was a message of love. She came with the assurance that I am here. I am your mother.
Yo vi a un polaco, Juan Pablo II, que a pesar de estar enfermo, débil y realmente en situación muy penosa, como todos sabemos, él quiso venir a besar a la Virgen de Guadalupe. No solamente son la gente morena de mi pueblo. Yo he visto cómo americanos, como gente que tiene una raíz distinta, nos unimos como hermanos y comprendí cómo ella hace de tantos pueblos el único pueblo de Dios.
En el 2002, Juan Pablo viajó a México para canonizar a San Juan Diego. Ahí, en la Basílica de Nuestra Señora de Guadalupe, el Papa Juan Pablo II nos dijo a quién le pertenecía su corazón.
Me voy, pero no me voy. Me voy, pero no me ausento. Pues donde me voy, de corazón me duele.
With John Paul II, you have the directness of a personal witness that touched people's lives directly. Whether it was the young, dynamic, energetic Pope who was traveling around the world to open the doors to Christ, or whether it was the infirm, elderly, dying Pope, he used every means available to communicate the authentic witness of Jesus Christ. And having done that, year after year, in season, out of season, he has had a transformative effect, not only in the church, but also within the variety of national experiences in the Western Hemisphere.